Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Islamic Human Rights Commission, who always comes to the, the right moment to discuss all the important issues. We sometimes forget that the people organizing behind, doors, and I want to, acknowledge them. Some of them that are working within the Islamic Human Rights Commission organization, doing the work that all of us should be doing every day. Anyway, thank you. I wanted to mention a few things because we're talking about, of course, media representation. We're talking about the subjectivity of the people, their memory, and how the combination between this subjectivity and the messages that are being carried on into the media, there are basic things we already know, that the media is controlled by some, interest, and there is always these few companies that we can laundry list them, that are the ones controlling a lot of the information. There are some people doing experiments with media in terms of checking what is being said in the newscast in 50 countries, and it's almost a repetition of, they're almost the same words, everywhere. It's like as if it's coordinated somewhere that they have to say it's a script for certain issues, and so I would like to basically put on the, put here on the table as an example of this kind of fake news media or this kind of double standards, what has happened recently in Syria, okay? I don't want to discuss here right now because that would be a long discussion and it could take us easily out of the topic of this table, the question of Assad, okay? Because I think everybody, even those who supported Assad, have critical views of Assad. So I don't think there is, in a sense, a big disagreement about the content of the Assad government and what was some of the things going on anyway. The point is that I would like to pose here on the table is, look, there are people in this country and in other countries of Europe that have been put in jail or put in front of a court with charges of collaboration with terrorism, just because they are supporting the resistance in Palestine and the resistance in Lebanon. And because Western powers classify them as terrorists, okay, there are people put there, in front of the courts, accusing them of all kinds of things, trying to destroy their lives. That's what they're trying to achieve. And also giving an exemplar to the rest of the people to think twice about, supporting X or Y group, okay? But look at this. The Western press in the last 2 weeks have been praising overtly terrorist groups, such as the fusion, this HTS is the fusion of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, okay, in a new cocktail. They change their names every once in a while because part of the strategy is changing names, because changing the brands, and rebranding the whole thing. Because these groups, we all know now, I think 10 years ago, I would be saying this here, and people will be scandalized, but I think everybody knows that this is a fabrication of Western intelligence agencies, from CIA to the Mossad. We all know this already. Even in US Congress, you could see videos of some Congress people, senators, just saying it overtly, Even you have heard already some of these, US Secretary of State or et cetera over time saying, oh, did you know in Syria, Al-Qaeda is working for us? It's been years repeating this, okay? We already have seen over and over again the replay of this propaganda, okay? Huh? Contras. Yes, these are contras, exactly, you know, and the thing is they are organized finance, you know, they get the weapon, they get everything from the West to do this crazy stuff that they do. And we've seen in the Syrian war, we've seen in Libya, we've seen in Iraq, we've seen all over the place, these groups going crazy and out of control, doing all this stuff. And you know, at the beginning, people were, you know, like, okay, who are these groups? And people bought into the narrative, media narrative, okay, about, oh, these groups are doing all this crazy stuff. So therefore, we, imperialist countries, we have to intervene militarily there. No, that's one of the purposes of these groups. An excuse to intervene militarily, or to topple a government they don't like. One of the two. It's a formula, you know, that you can see repeated over and over again. Now, after, I don't know, 15 years of this, more, because if we count Afghanistan in the 80s, it's, I don't know how many years now, 40? I don't know. Of the same narrative repeated over and over again, you know, all this fake news, making people believe that, you know, the West is the good guys and they're there helping the people out of these terrorists, no? And so either it's because we need to intervene because, you know, these people are doing these atrocities, or they just let them topple a government they don't like, okay? And then they back them up, this kind of thing. And we've seen that in Africa, we've seen that in many places, not only in the Middle East. But guess what? The press, Western press, have been, over the past 2 weeks, doing exaltation of terrorism. Have you seen this? Rebranding Al-Qaeda and rebranding ISIS. Have you seen this? And have you seen any court case against Western press about this? Zero. This tells you the double standard, because in their records, still they haven't changed their policies overtly. They haven't yet declared that this group is not terrorist. They didn't have the time to do that. They will do it very soon. But it took them, you know, it was so fast that they haven't done that, you know? So literally, they could be taken as, you know, as, how you say, propagandists of terrorism, because they've been rebranding these groups, celebrating these groups, and so on. And now my question is, why, when it's about resistant popular movements fighting oppression, then they are the terrorists? But when it's about this kind of terrorist group fabricated in Washington and in Tel Aviv, okay, then they are liberators. You see, now they are called liberators, okay? So, and look at the complicity of the media, systematic complicity of the media in these things. We're talking about media, fake news, you know, here you go. You know, here we go. You can see there how they are, you know, doing this, how can I say, doing the job for the system and for, you know, rebranding these groups and whitewashing them. Whitewashing them, they change the way they cut their beard, they put them in a suit or whatever. They go to, this guy goes to CNN, a guy that have a bounty of $10 million by the USA. And they haven't yet taken away. It's still there. You see? And so, I mean, this is something that is so overt. You see, it's so in our faces. And they keep doing it as if nothing. You know why? Because they're relying on, this brother was talking about memory, on the amnesia, historical amnesia of Western people, Western populations, historical amnesia. That is, they don't, this change of names and things like that, they don't even remember, okay, who these people are. Okay? They don't even connect the dots, because there is a systematic cutting off in terms of the disinformation in the media, It's a systematic cutting off of the memory of who are these people, where they're coming from. There's no explanation. It's just there, oh, the liberation of Syria, oh, the freedom fighters or whatever, and suddenly you get caught in the language and people start thinking that, in fact, there was this liberation movement when, in fact, these people went from the border of Turkey, where they were fabricated there and trained, all the way to Damascus with no major obstacle, because everything was negotiated previously. And then, guess what? The other thing I don't get is lack of memory. Talking about lack of memory, is we've seen, you remember when Saddam Hussein fell? The celebrations that were going on in Baghdad and in many places around the Muslim world? Look where is Iraq today, okay? Look also carefully at what happened in these celebrations. A lot of the people who were in the celebrations, years later, not only they are repented of having gone into this celebration, they have nostalgia about the years of Saddam Hussein. It's that bad. It's that bad. Imperialist intervention, they come and destroy the countries and kill millions of people, displace millions of people, and then at the end, it's just a disaster, okay? And while they keep the country fragmented in pieces, because that's what they do, they destroy the country, they are stealing the oil, okay, with oil, how do you call that? Oil pipelines, thank you, from the oil wells to all the way to the sea, while the people in the country are fighting each other and, going crazy about each other, creating sectarian division, civil war, all kinds of crazy. Look at Libya. You know how many people celebrated the fall of Gaddafi? And a lot of the people today are not only ashamed of having done that, they are repented to the point that now they have nostalgia for the years of Gaddafi. It's that bad. The country has been destroyed. There's no Libya anymore. Libya do not exist anymore. Libya is like a mess, like a civil war, and a never-ending civil war. That's what it is. While they have the pipelines of oil going to the Mediterranean Sea and taking and stealing the oil from Libya every single day. That's what they're doing. While Libyans are killing each other. Now, isn't that enough information for us to know what's coming to Libya, to Syria? I'm sorry. Isn't that enough information this is like a replay of the same thing. I can understand people being naive the first time with Saddam Hussein, okay? And having illusion that the West is going to rebuild Iraq and do all these promises they did. But look at Iraq. Look at Libya. Look at Yemen. Now, I was having a debate with a friend of mine, and I was telling this friend of mine, because the friend of mine was, let's give them a chance. Maybe things are going to be different now. All this stuff. And I was Sunday, the first day. And I said, well, let's talk a year from now. You know what? I wrote back and say, let's talk now, 2 days later. Syria doesn't exist anymore. From the south, it's taken over by the Zionists. They took over all the south. They are 20 kilometers from Damascus. Are you aware of this? They destroy the Syrian army in 48 hours, okay? They destroy it. And then you have in the north, Turkey, led by this guy Erdogan, who betrayed the same Syrian people because he was questioned because there were already information that they were training over there. And so when the Syrian government contacted the Turk government, hey, what are you doing there? These are like military forces there. Are you coming this way? Say, no way. We're not going to invade Syria.
So they lie. And of course, you have, it always happens with these leaders, nationalist Arab leaders, that they all end in a similar way, having some kind of illusions about Western promises. And so you look at the last days of Saddam Hussein in power, if you look at the last days of Gaddafi, if you look at the last days of, they believe all the, how you say, Hamelin flute, the Hamelin flute of the West. Yeah, like all the promises. And they all believe, suddenly, they in a very naive way, people who have been, for years being attacked. Look, Assad has been attacked by in the civil war by all these countries. And then suddenly he goes to Arab League, and then he starts believing the promises of Qatar, the promises of the Emirates, the promises of Saudi Arabia, and he starts believing naively in their promises. And he forgot who were the people supporting him. And they were telling him, if you distance yourself from Hezbollah and from Iran and from all these people, you get the investment, we'll stop the sanctions, we'll do, and all these promises that were just false promises. And the guy believed them. And so he took a distance from these other forces that were the ones supporting him and ended up where he ended up. But the same thing happened to Gaddafi. Gaddafi thought that giving some oil fields to the West, he would be, they won't mess with him. Saddam Hussein, the same. And then they end up, betrayed by all these promises, lied by these promises that are just a way to hypnotize them, get them to go to sleep while they are conspiring to topple them. This is what they do. But if the first time we went and celebrate, please, cannot be now the third time and we go and celebrate. They have destroyed, Syria doesn't exist anymore. It's destroyed. It's right now, there is a partition of Syria in I don't know how many countries and different groups, etc. And did you see that these groups that came from Damascus, came from Turkey, took power in Damascus? They don't say anything about the Zionist invasion of Syria, taking over all the south of Syria. They're 20 kilometers away, and they still, all their obsession is about Hezbollah, Iran, and don't say anything about the Zionists. They have destroyed their army, their arsenal, weapons, everything, and they don't criticize Israel. Have you noticed? On the contrary, when they arrived to Damascus, the first thing they said is, thanks, Israel, for supporting us. That's what they said, okay? I don't know how much more evidence we need to know where is this going, okay? And so I'm saying this because we need, see, there is a combination here in this table. We heard both the media complicity with all these atrocities, but also there is a problem in Western subjectivity, that there is historical amnesia. People doesn't know really what the history, not even history of 3 years ago. I'm not talking history of 100 years ago. Just 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It's enough, no? They don't even know anything about that. And then suddenly they rebrand the name, they rebrand everything, and people get caught into supporting this kind of terrorist groups. And people I bet you anything, you go and do a survey today about public opinion, about what's happening in Syria in the last week. Very few people will tell you what's going on there. People think that they're celebrating victory and that Syria is the same Syria of a week ago. Syria disappeared as Syria, okay? And the same thing they did in Libya, but please, it cannot be that it happened one time, we celebrate naively, and then boom, we see they destroy Iraq. And then it happened in Libya, and then boom, they destroy Libya. And now we're celebrating again, as if with no memory of what is it that these imperialist forces and Zionist forces are into, okay? They're into destroying the countries, because for them, it's better to destroy powerful states and fragment them in little pieces so that they control them, exploit them, and dominate them better. That's it. It's very simple. There's no complication to understand this. And so we need to focus into the political consciousness of the people in the countries we are, okay, whose historical amnesia, whose historical ignorance led them to believe anything coming from the press. And I think that's where the challenge is. How can we turn around this consciousness, imperialist, racist consciousness that makes white working class, that are many of them suffering from financial crisis, all kind of thing, turn them into complicity to imperialist forces? This is, I think, a big challenge. Anyway, I stop here. Thank you.
Approach that question, Ramon?
No, I wanted to answer some of the other questions. Sure. I think that Islamophobia is a form of racism. I think that if we don't have that clear, we are lost before the battle begins. Of course, the problem we have, and this is really a conceptual issue, is that we collapse racism with the marker. And we think that racism is the marker of racism is color. And we lost sight of what is racism, and we lost sight of the multiple markers of racism. If you look at colonial history, it gives you the answer. Racism is a hierarchy of domination or superiority, inferiority along the line of the human, where the people that are hyperhumanized as superior beings, the system deal with the conflicts with regulation, emancipation. That means use of codes of law, civil rights, women's rights, labor rights. The list is long, because the humanity of those people are not in question. And emancipatory discourses such as equality, such as justice, such as freedom is recognized, okay? Even if it's formally. But the humanity of the people there is not in question, therefore the system uses this kind of methods for regulating the conflicts, for managing conflicts. And the other side, and the people who are dehumanized, okay, below the line of the human, non-human, or subhumans, the system uses violence and dispossession as a constant. So we're talking about, it's a structural. We're talking about structures. Racism is structural. If we think that we're going to break away with racism by convincing white people that we are good guys, good luck with that one. Okay? You need to change the structures as the priority to really deal with these questions. I'll give you an example. When there was that law in the early 60s where they called black kids to be able to enter schools in the south of the USA, remember that? And the whites went like crazy to the schools to impede black kids from entering the school. You remember that? Okay, there were two lines there. Okay, white people in the South are not ready. Let's educate them. Let's try to convince them and explain them that, try to educate them because they're ignorant about other people, right? This is the liberal definition of racism, that thinks that racism is a problem of stereotypes, of wrong ideas of other people, and that kind of thing. You know what Kennedy did? John F. Kennedy? He mobilized the National Guard of each state. He made a structural intervention and protected the kids with the National Guard. If they would have been waiting to educate the whites, will be 200 more years with that one. So we're talking, it's not going to change the problem by going around and telling people how good we are
or telling people what is Islam, or I'm not saying don't do that, don't get me wrong. I'm saying that's not going to be enough because the problem is not about stereotype or prejudice. The problem is structural. And if you don't go into the causation, the structural causation of the problem, you won't solve it. You'll be forever educating people about their prejudice, about this, about that. You will never make change. Okay? That's the problem. So we need a political anti-racism dealing with the structural transformations, okay, that will guarantee that the rights of people that are being affected by this structure of inferiorization of human beings, of dehumanization, okay, are respected. And that's only going to happen structurally. It's not going to happen by you going around and saying how good you are, or going and showing the 5 principles of Islam so that people can understand that, no, Islamophobia is not that. It's not a lack of understanding about who you are. Islamophobia is a marker of superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. Look, the Irish were as white as the British. Does that mean there was no racism in Ireland? There was racism, but the marker was not color. What did the colonizers use? Religious identity, the Protestant and the Catholics. And then that marker was about superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. That's the definition of racism. Don't get confused. The rest is bull. Don't get confused. And in the debates about racism that we have in the anti-racist movement, we fall into traps like this because then we think that racism is about color markers. And we forget that in colonial history, there's so many markers they've been using. It's not only color. Color is fundamental. I don't want to deny that. That's very important, but it's not the only one. And Islamophobia is a marker about religious identity, you see, through which they mark the barbarian, the savage, the terrorist, the dangerous people, that kind of thing. This is racism. This is the way the structure operates, okay? By then marking people along markers, you see, that it's going to mark superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. It's a structural hierarchy. It's not, it's nothing else. It's a structural hierarchy. The same with anti-Semitism, the same with any other marker that they have used historically. So we need to break away from the idea that racism is color. That's the liberal notion that predominates today in imperialist society, that is about color. No, racism is a hierarchy of dehumanizing some people and hyperhumanizing others. But the marker is contingent to the historical context, you see? And I want to say something else. If you look at the people that are celebrating, the leaders of the world, celebrating the terrorists taking over in Syria, the most happy guy was Netanyahu, a genocidal guy, right? And then you see all the others who were in complicity with Netanyahu in the genocide of the Palestinians, all celebrating. Doesn't that tell you something, okay, about who is behind the whole thing? And then, if they can rebrand Al-Qaeda, Syria, al-Nusra, okay, like this, in a question of hours, why there cannot be in the media some kind of positive image about Muslims in the West? You see, the problem is not a problem of, how can I say, a problem of individual prejudice. Is structural. They don't want to make, it's structurally, systematically constructed. Partly because if you manage to keep the idea that keep Muslims down in the West, disempower the Zionists have party time. Because the association that the Zionists want to create in the minds of everybody is that, see, we are doing with these Muslims over here what you guys are doing there. So we are in the same place. We're in solidarity, you see? So this is structural. Don't lose sight of this problem. And so, last thing, talking about genocide, right now in Europe, but not only in Europe, we can add USA, we are coming close to a situation, and I won't be surprised, that the situation in Europe deteriorates politically, economically, into a Great Depression, something like this, and then they start scapegoating, like they always do. Every time there is a Great Depression, they scapegoat in genocidal ways. Do you know what I'm talking about? Who do you think are going to be the main victims of that if this happens very soon? Because we are like this. I won't be surprised in the next few years if somewhere you have somewhere in Europe a genocide against Muslim people, because the subjective conditions are there already. The structural conditions are there already. And so we need to take this very seriously, because we are right now living moments that are really dangerous. And unless we put together our minds in terms of what is Islamophobia, why is Islamophobia a form of racism, and all this stuff, if we don't fight back structurally, rather than trying to convince white people how good we are, okay, we could have our days counted. Thank you.